invite the moderator, Dr. Kalindi, to kindly moderate this session. Dr. Kalindi.
Thank you, Dr. Avitoli. Good afternoon to all. I welcome you to this session on reviewing and analyzing secondary literature. Today we have with us Professor Nita Mathur, Professor of Sociology at Indira Gandhi National Open University. Professor Mathur has been a visiting scholar at MSA Paris, School of Planning and Architecture, University of Delhi, Center for the Study of Social Systems, IGNOU, and many other institutions of repute. She has been an associate editor for Indian Anthropologist. Professor Mathur has authored Cultural Rhythms in Emotions, Narratives and Dance, and has edited Santhal Worldview and Consumer Culture, Modernity and Identity, all of which deal with the themes of tribal language and culture, folklore and performance studies, consumer culture, and middle class. I welcome Professor Mathur, and with apology, I would like to inform her that she has about 25 minutes for the session. Professor Mathur.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the organizers for calling me over. Great opportunity to be here and talking to such a large number of audience, such a large number of people. I was asked to speak on review and analysis of literature. Now, I start with a basic, very, very basic question that we researchers have in mind. Why do we need to review literature at all? Why do we need to review or look over previous studies? Obviously, many of us know that we are taught, and we as teachers all the time tell you have to identify the gaps in research, and that's why you need to review the literature, the previous studies done. Well, I think there is a little more to it when it comes to review of literature. You see, one has to locate one's study in an appropriate context. For example, when I study consumption, and I was just reading something on consumption, there's so much of literature available on consumption in the field of economics, in the field of political science, the political economy perspective. There's the social context. There is a whole set of, there is a historical framework also within which consumption can be looked at. Now, it depends which framework you will choose, which framework one chooses to deal with, to focus on. So if I choose to study the social context of consumption, that is the kind of literature I will need to review. Now, if I just go into the waters and start studying consumption, I will not know what to do, which perspective to use. I may not even know that there are many more perspectives than what I have in my mind. So it's obviously to develop a perspective to make sense and interpret the data that you collect, and to identify a theoretical framework or a theoretical perspective that could, not always, guide your study. Then, of course, to identify the gaps in knowledge and add to the body of knowledge. And I'll tell you how we actually go about doing it. Review of literature is also necessary to relate your own study with the study of others. You see, this does not mean that one has to agree. Your findings have to corroborate the findings of others or similar findings of others. It may differ also, and it's very important to differ, because then you are able to identify the reason for the difference or the reason for corroboration of the earlier studies. In either ways, it does not, corroboration or identifying differences from previous studies does not show in any way whether your own study is, or rather say our own study, is good or bad or positive. It has no bearing with the quality of your own research. You see? Let's move on further and then I'll come back to it. Many of us wonder at what stage should literature be reviewed? Well, unless it's an exploratory study where no previous studies are available, and that's not too common these days, one should review literature at the beginning itself. Though this literature review may not be exhaustive, so to say. So one studies the key researches of others. At the beginning of the study, when it is the stage of formulation, you will be able to this should be a preliminary review of literature. That's the first stage, where you are able to identify the gaps in research, and in accordance with that, plan your own research. For instance, when you set out to study, say something on consumption or something on migration, a lot of people are talking about migration. Now, unless you do review of literature, unless you have studied, you are aware of the perspectives or the reasons why people migrate, not only in India, also outside, your own study will not be enriched. It will be a standalone kind of a research where you are just talking about, it will be only descriptive. What happens, and when I examine a lot of theses these days, what I see is very descriptive studies come up. Descriptive studies are not bad, and they are required. They have a lot of merit in them, but we expect our studies to be more analytical, to be more reflective. And how will analysis come? How will reflection come? It will come through review of literature. It will come after you have reviewed a lot of studies, and then you are able to identify what happens. You see, there's one thing that you go collect data, come back, that's, and you describe it. That's what I mean by description. When I say analysis, what I mean is what you are able to take out, abstract from the study. Of course, I remember Clifford Geertz talked about thick description, and we are talking about ethnographies in which, people's analysis is important. But even to make sense of people's analysis, there has to be an understanding of at least people's ethos, people's way of thinking. So if I studied the Santhals, and if I did not study other works on Santhals, it would not make sense. So it is for that. And then a more exhaustive review of literature comes when we write out our thesis, when we write out our dissertation. Then, of course, it's a more exhaustive review of literature, where we reach out to many more studies that are relevant to our own study. And I'll tell you how we go about doing it in a minute. Elements in research, in literature review, as I say, if you ask me to state them, I would say existing information in the field of research, major formative works in the field, key researchers working in the area, and the other reason why literature must be reviewed, especially at the beginning of your study, is because sometimes these literature reviews lead us to significant methodologies or newer methodologies that one can apply in one's own study also. You see, we all have courses on research methodology, and we all, the techniques of research are usually common that we all study and we all teach. But there are many ways in which techniques can be innovated, can be modified, can be developed in your own research also. You see, I was studying the dance, and I did not know how people would respond to how people. I was trying to connect dance with people's culture, and when they were not giving me information, I thought they were only talking about dance. I used the dance mudras, for example, to obtain data from them, and it worked very well. So I drew the hand mudras and showed them and told them what it means. I formed the hand mudras, I asked them what it means, and there was a plethora of data that came. Now, how did I reach to this? How did I reach to this thought of creating, developing a new way of collecting data, of taking data, when nothing else was working? It was because I had read a lot of literature earlier. For example, there's something called the contrived situation interview, which many of us don't use in our studies, in our researches. But that was something that I was required to use, and I could use because I had read previous studies that had used it. So I knew how to do it. I knew what I could get out of it. So it came in very handy. That's also the reason why literature review should be taken very seriously, rather than just a chapter in the thesis. And I know many of you, or rather many of us, do it also. Let's move on to what should be included in the review of literature, and then I will quickly go on to how literature review can be done and how it should be presented. You see, literature review should include scholarly articles, books, reports, dissertations, conference proceedings, credible websites, not the usual, sasta kind of or non-serious kind of literature. Of course, government records, international database. What I found very interesting was when I was studying this whole thing about consumption, and you see, and I also studied the BPOs. It's very difficult to get data from the BPO workers, the frontline workers. So you see, what came handy, and why I'm narrating this is because this is something that you can use also. Each one of us can do. Maybe some of us are already doing it, and for them this could be superfluous. For example, there was a book that I reached out to. It was called the BPO Sutra, the stories of inside India's BPOs and call centers. It was, I think, by Sunindra. It just had narratives of the BPO employees. I included that in the study because I realized that many of the BPO employees had, it was common book for them. It was about them and they enjoyed reading it in their travel. That provided an entry point to strike a conversation with them, to build rapport and get information. So what I want to say is that books like these can be used also as a database. So one could relate one's own study with what was presented in the BPO Sutra. Now, depending on the topic, the nature and scope of the study, the sources of literature depend. For example, one can do a comparative study of middle class in Asian countries. So the circle is a little wide. There could be a study of middle class in the metropolitan cities in India. So the circle is little narrowed down. There could be a study of the middle class in Delhi NCR. The circle shrinks further. Depending on which of these is your area, is your domain of inquiry, determines the difference in the scope of literature review. There is no denying that if you study the middle class in Delhi NCR, that you should not review the book on middle class in Latin America, for example. Right? But if you study the middle class in the world over or something like that, you will definitely bring in the book on Latin America. If you study middle class in the Asian countries, then all literature dealing with Asian countries at least must be included. So the kind of literature that you review depends also on the scope of your own study and what kind of a study it is. You see, if it is a study on the social context, different literature. If it's a study on, say, the political economy that influences the middle class, right? The review of literature is a little different. Let's see how the approaches to any literature review. what could be the approach. And a lot of students, a lot of people present their review of literature as, a kind of a back-to-back presentation of the studies of whatever material they have read. One thing, there has to be a logic, there has to be a reason in why a particular article or a book or a dissertation is being referred to. Not just because everything comes your way that you start reviewing it and you just read the abstract and you write something. That's not appropriate. There has to be a logic in why what is included in your literature review is included, right? One. That actually minimizes, reduces the burden on you also, because then you're not hunting for anything and everything. You're not butterfly hunting in that sense. So the review can be either chronological. You see, when you're talking about the development of an idea, for example, some idea that you're talking about, the review could be chronological. The review can be thematic. I'll tell you how thematic review can be done. The review can be methodological and the review can be theoretical. But what one expects the least is saying, Patnaik, just an example, because he's spoken before me and he's a very dear friend. Patnaik 2020 said this. Pathak 2019 said this. There's no point. One after the other, one after the other. What is the purpose of a literature review? The purpose of a literature review is to bring out a comprehensive way what the other studies have done, or to comprehensively bring out a particular thought or the evolution or the development or the rise of a thought that has come up over a period of time. So when you say this person said this, this person said this, this person said this, it just doesn't make sense. It just fills up pages in our research article or in our thesis, in whatever we are writing. So there's no point doing it. And one expects in usual sense and in most situations that a review be thematic in nature. When I say thematic, where will the themes come from? Where will the themes come from? There are two ways to look at it. Either you read a plethora of literature and from that cull out certain themes and group your literature in those themes and present them further within that same theme more thematically. That is one way to do it, which is very easy to say in a workshop, but which is actually very difficult to do in a practical situation. What's more appropriate and what's very workable and what many of us do is to cull out the themes from the objectives of the study itself. So if you have, say, 5 objectives of the study. Now, from those 5 objectives, you should be able to cull out certain themes and review literature within those themes, pertaining to those themes. It's easier to do. It's possible to do. It's workable to carry out, in a practical situation, and it is more logical to do, because finally we are not doing, unless you are writing for annual review of anthropology or sociology or something, then it's different. But if you're writing for your own thesis or your own article or your own paper, it must relate with the objectives. So it's more appropriate to cull out the themes from your own objectives of the study. Now, the other thing I wanted to tell you and use this platform to discuss was that there is another way in which secondary data and literature can be used. That is, for example, when you have, and I go back to consumption, you're studying consumption in a village in, say, UP, right? And you say you find out the income that people, disposable income that people have and that they uh, to buy consumer items, and you have that data. When you search NSSO data, you will find MPCE. MPCE is monthly per capita consumer expenditure. So what you're able to find is there is a lot of the data that you find can then be linked with the MPCE at the district level, at the state level. At the national level, it may be a bit too much, but at the district level, one can. So that is how, secondary literature can be, more secondary data can be used to corroborate your own study and say that, while at the district level, MPCE is this much, in the village, it is less, which means the disposable income at the hands of people in the village, in this particular village or this cluster of villages is less. The people have less income at hand to spend on consumer items. So that's how it can be done, and that's how it is very relevant. So having said all this, let me conclude with just a very small point that I had thought I will make, and even before that, just a runner. How do you do review of literature? You've identified the themes, you know the sources. So what do you Google? First, you Google. No, these days we used to sit in, my friends will bear me out on this, that we used to sit in the library from morning to evening, pick up all the journals, even clean the dust and run over them, all of that. But it's easier these days, perhaps. So what do you look for? You identify certain keywords. You Google those, or you look for those keywords, and certain literature will come. How do you go about it? You read the literature, and especially read the bibliography, the references at the end, and follow up on those references. It becomes easier. And now the last point that I wanted to make was that how should you structure the portion on literature review? I think the best way to do it is one should have an introduction, which should define or explain the topic of research, provide an appropriate context for reviewing the literature, go on to explaining the sequence of the review, the scope of the review, what is included and what is not included. So it's like providing a roadmap at the beginning of the chapter itself, so one knows what one expects throughout. Right? Then one goes on to the main body, and I said that we expect, it's most appropriate, as I think, to present a thematic review. So you have each theme, and within that theme, you review the relevant studies. And I said that these could be obtained from the objectives of the study. And then there should be, usually I find at many places there is no conclusion, but there should be a concluding section in a review of literature chapter, essentially, because otherwise it's an assortment of ideas, of studies, of data, and one does not know what one has concluded from it, why What am I to make of this? What am I to make of Mathur's study, for example? What is it? Why do I need it here? So it's important to have a concluding portion which summarizes the important aspects of the existing body of literature, which identifies the significant flaws or gaps in the existing studies or in the existing knowledge about a particular topic, and then be able to link your own study with the existing studies. That is the crux. That is the whole objective of the study of review of literature. Unless I'm able to demonstrate properly and very clearly why we have studied, why we have reviewed certain literature, it will not make sense. It will not present relevance to your own study. That is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mathur. It was a privilege to hear you speak on literature review, which you begin by arguing should be contextualized both within the particularities of geopolitical, cultural, as well as social historical context of the study. In building an analytical reflexive account as opposed to a descriptive account, the role of literature review is crucial. New and rarer methodologies, such as contrived situation interview, can be more employed when a literature review of the scholar as well as the study is profound. Professor Mathur further fleshes out through several examples of intensive and extensive studies the content of what an ideal literature review should be. The sheer web of nebulous abstraction that surrounds the question of literature review and confounds the scholar is dexterously put into the pragmatic as well as empirical utilitarian perspective in this conversation with Professor Mathur. I would now like to open the forum for questions. Ma'am, we have very few of them, a number of them actually. There's one question that is about if there is related literature and if while doing literature review, the biggest problem which a scholar witnesses in the absence of exact or same literature on the topic, area, or theme which is being pursued, which can solidify the argument greatly. Also, such related literature may not really bring depth in the introduction of research paper. In such a scenario, if the scholar fails to accumulate related literature to review, should a scholar change the topic, or should he or she review similar literature just for the sake of doing it, especially since no research thesis is complete without literature review?
Do I answer each one? I think let's do.
There is one more which is quite similar. That if there are a lot of research papers on the same theme with the same outcomes, can we consider should we consider all of them, or should we have only a couple of them with same outcome? These are the two questions which are based on the similar theme. Then there is one more interesting question about how different disciplines could be connected through literature reviews in order to inspect and develop interdisciplinary perspectives, especially on the theme of migration. There's another question. Many well-written books do not write a long literature review. Instead, they tend to bring the research objective, framework, key question, and present the literature review like a discourse, as if it's a dialogue and interaction between various scholarly works in order to create a logical argument. Is it a discipline-specific method, or is it interdisciplinary in nature?
Oh. Is that it?
Ma'am, there are quite a few questions on literature review with regard to review methods for anthropology, but I suppose these are the key questions that you could focus on.
Okay, and maybe if there's time, we could
yes, we can
go on to many more others also. We start with the question that said, if there is not much of exact studies that match your own study completely, what do we do about it? And whether one should accumulate data That's what it was, no? Whether one should just review for the sake of reviewing. What do we do about it?
Yes.
Well, I think there should not be. We should not expect our studies to, to have parallels in previous studies exactly. What I mean, and I'm a little obscure, I feel, when I say this sentence. What I mean more specifically is that, if there cannot be a complete match with previous studies, then there is the purpose of research is defeated. We started at the outset that there are gaps in knowledge. We have to fill up new knowledge. We have to identify newer areas of research. All that we will talk about, and this is far too obvious. So, a study conducted in Krishnagadi village, in Krishnagadi village, and the fifth one in Krishnagadi village may be hard to find, and we should not even expect it. To accumulate is not the right word, because you're not just going out and harvesting data and accumulating them in bundles. That's not what we are talking about. What we are talking about is that you will review literature that relates with your study, in the sense, and I said this earlier, when one is studying consumption, there are a lot of studies on consumption, lots of them, right? And it's not possible for anyone to humanly bring all these studies together, not leave out a single one. That's humanly not possible, right? So what we do is, and that is why I was emphasizing all through, that you identify certain themes, based on your objectives, you review literature. Now, what I think what the person who's asked the question wants to know is that even within a theme, if there is a lot of literature, is it possible, or should I be reviewing all of it? No, it's not possible. Don't even attempt it. What's possible for you to do is whatever, and you see, as Professor Patnaik was saying in the morning, that it is a sense of judgment, it is a sense of decision that you have to take. Which studies you have to refer to, which study should be excluded, which study should be excluded? Should it be those studies that are conducted by lesser known people but important to your study? Should we exclude them and instead fill up the space with those big names who do not even relate with the study? I think that the second approach is not correct. One should include the studies that are relevant to your own work, that are going to influence, that are going to help you make sense of your own data, of your own information. Studies that will be able to further your own objectives of study. So the bottom line is that there has to be a decision at your end. And then as an examiner, or as an outsider, when you're asked a question, why did you not include this particular study? You should have a ready answer, because it's on logic that you're working. That is what. The other one was how to deal with the interdisciplinarity in review of literature. That's not a very difficult thing to do these days. One, because they are the interdisciplinary material or literature is of easy access these days, right? One should include interdisciplinary, literature from other disciplines also, but not to the extent that your own discipline and your own perspective is sort of gone haywire. That should not happen. But so long as perspectives from other like for example, The Great Transformation, that book has been used by economists, by social science, by sociologists, I'm sure anthropologists, economists, a lot of people, because they help you understand the situation. They help you interpret your data, make sense of your data, as I've been saying. So interdisciplinarity can be included. What can be done if there is a significant You see, the reader is not an enemy sitting at the other end. The reader is only unaware of what you have in mind, right? So as long as you can justify why you are doing what you are doing, the purpose is served. If you take material from, say, political science, or if you take an economistic perspective, you should be able to explain and justify that. And you should be able to say that, you see, look at the difference. Of late, if you read the article by Dipankar Gupta on migration, where he's talking of the reason that most of these people, the labor went back because they didn't want to die unprayed. The economists have a very different perspective on it. So and I'm just bringing out two different perspectives for the sake of explaining at this level. There are many more perspectives. So when you choose to review on migration, and these are the two studies, how are you going to present? If you are a sociologist or an anthropologist and you review Dipankar, you can also say the economists, the economic perspective or the economist perspective on this whole on migration differs from this on these counts. However, it is, I feel, or it is appropriate, or from the anthropological perspective, I think the economists lack insight into the social context, or it would be appropriate if they build in the social context into the whole thing. So that kind of the choice of including of including such dynamics in your review of literature always exists, and never let go and never forego this choice of yours. So I think this is the way into, and I say this because when I did the study on dance, I used a lot of literature from psychology. So I was bringing psychology and anthropology. Of course, there is something called psychological anthropology, and with very distinct domain. And I was using those readings also. So one has to build it as warp and woof. The other question was on books that do not have an exhaustive chapter on literature review. We do not expect books to have a full chapter on literature review, because what we expect the book to be doing is pursuing certain ideas or certain arguments. You see, as I have been saying, the whole purpose of the chapter or the section or the portion on literature review is to relate your own study with the other study. Utna hi hai, that much. Right?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry for intervening, but we have the next speaker waiting.
Just if you give me just 30 seconds,
Sure.
because this is a point I want to make. You see, as I said, you could have a separate chapter or a section or a portion on literature review. There's also, once you start writing your chapters or writing out your research, one should refer to the earlier studies also, which is what is usually done in the books. That is how they conjoin literature review with their chapters without devoting a whole section on literature review. But as students, we are expected to do a literature review because we want to show how the idea has evolved and what are the gaps in knowledge and things like that. I hope that would have answered to a large extent most of the questions.
Yes, and we have quite a few questions, but maybe we could take
mail them to me, and maybe
yes. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. We now have with us Dr. Rajanikant Pandey, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Tribal Studies at Central University of Jharkhand. Dr. Pandey's area of interest include anthropology of ecology, studies in science and technology, contemporary theories, and research methods. Dr. Pandey, I welcome you.
Thank you, Kalindi, Dr. Kalindi. At the very outset, let me congratulate the office bearers of Indian Anthropological Association for holding such an interesting webinar on research methodology, because what we see today in digitally uh, mediated pandemic era, most of the seminars and webinars are centered around the issues of COVID and health. So research, a webinar on research method is really refreshing. I would also like to thank uh, Professor Nilika Mehrotra ma'am for allowing me and giving this opportunity to speak in this webinar. Uh, I would also like to thank my previous speaker, Professor Nita Mathur ma'am, because she has addressed the same topic on which I am going to talk, and ma'am has presented it in very informative way, and it was quite a learning experience for me as well. So with this note, I would like to little bit brief what I'm going to talk in this lecture. Um, Basically, as ma'am has covered most of the thing, and it may be repetitive. So rather than focusing upon the what ma'am has said earlier, I would like to bring to the discussion my experiences of doing my doctoral research recently in 2010. I completed it in 2008 from University of Delhi, and bringing some the challenges which I faced on ground, and how I enter into the field of a kind of the new and emerging field, that is mining, anthropology of mining or extractive resources, and how I did my literature review in relation to that. So somehow I will bring examples from my own study, and then and from the larger field where I situated my study, that is the environmental anthropology. Let me also tell you that most of my understanding is limited to the discipline of anthropology, but I would like to cover to certain extent the discipline, sister disciplines like sociology, and to certain extent science and technology, etc., studies, etc. So in most of these disciplines, as we all know, that we mostly focus upon the qualitative research, and it has been said. And if you look at the very important study by Glasser and Strauss, who wrote in 1967 the discovery of grounded theory, where he suggested that, I am quoting him, that researchers should start collecting and analyzing data without looking for the existing literature in the field. So the tabula rasa was the mantra which was often used later on as an argument against scientific claims linked to qualitative research. So starting from the scratch, that was the generally told to the ethnographic researchers and anthropologists. But assuming that today, it would be naive to think that any field has no previous research or previous study today. And so when we start and when we choose sometimes very exciting or very new topic, we feel that, okay, it's very new topic and I may face problems in getting literature. But when you will look deeply, you will definitely find that there are previous studies. So, and the only idea is how to look deeply into it. And when now we are standing at a juncture where the socialities and the social realities are going to change, as our previous speakers, Professor Mehrotra and Professor Patnaik, has raised this issue, that new kind of sociality is emerging, where we are going to face certain number of exciting challenges at all level of social, cultural, and behavioral understanding, as well as for ethnographic and other genres of social research. So, borrowing from Fisher, who has very earlier in 1999 advocated for a kind of emergent form of anthropology, and to paraphrase him, I would like to say that in post-corona situations, there are three corresponding focus of attention we have. The first is the restoration of societies after social trauma. What I mean that COVID-19 has given us a collective trauma, a collective experiences of health and fear of health. So we have become more than ever conscious towards our own health. The different kind of immunity and issues of yoga, exercise, all these new lexicon has emerged to address the agenda of and the unfolding of post-corona life or post-COVID life, where we are supposed to imagine new kind of social realities. So this social trauma, certainly because it is a collective trauma, it may arise and it may create a kind of opportunities for mass action. So far, we are not seeing that at the global level there is a united consensus to fight COVID, or and then there is the organized way of protesting the existing political orders to create health infrastructure, etc. Rather, we have accepted this new normal, a new life, and since opening of the lockdown, we are saying that if you just move outside our home, nothing has much changed except wearing mask, etc. So I think this new sociality will be addressed by this new kind of social trauma and its experiences, and how humanity can come out with it, how humanity is able to fight with it. The second is the importance of science and technology. As we are seeing continuously that there was discussions when COVID started that we will move towards the local knowledge and there will be move towards native and all that. But somehow, what I think that science and technology has reinforced its power again, and we have to imagine our future understanding, our future knowledge creation, our future researches in terms of the more and more advanced and sophisticated use of science and technology. This is, for example, that we are sitting in a webinar where 500 attendants are listening me right now, which was not earlier possible when we are holding seminar in the Department of Anthropology, and even the room was full. There were hardly 100 to 120 participants. And thirdly, this rise of science and technology and reinforcing of science and technology, I think there will be more and more use of virtual and electronic and visual media, and they will be able to bring the global audiences together somehow, where there is a in political domain and in other domain there is talk of going low, but at least if I look at the university system and university setup, we are moving more and more global. There is chances that we will be holding global conferences on webinar, and we will be able to listen, sitting in remote universities, even will be able to sit and listen the global experts or the experts in our area of research. So that possibility, and I think when it comes to the literature review, we should be able to utilizing these new possibilities and new way of doing emergent anthropology or ethnography. As I said that I will not talk much about the theoretical part of doing literature review, and rather I will focus upon the experiences of doing literature review. So the first and foremost question which comes to my mind is, where is my literature? Is it in my university library, or what if it is not with my available in my institution? Where to find it? So personally, for me, when I started doing an anthropology of mining, and I was trying to look at in how this environmental rhetorics or environmental movements or environmental activism tries to understand the role of mining industry in a particular local. I did my field work in Jharkhand, and there I was trying to understand that how iron mining has created or not created a state of environmental discourse or environmental activism or so-called environmentalism. So to begin with, I started looking, and when you start your research, first you go to your supervisor and ask what to read and what not to read and how to approach the topic, and I think they are the one who are the key in any process of literature review when you start your research. So and then and from his suggestion, I started looking into the annual reviews of anthropology. I think, and from my experiences, I will suggest to any of the research scholar or researcher who is going to start any research, they should look into two very important key journals in the field of anthropology, that is Annual Review of Anthropology and Reviews in Anthropology. You will find you have to put your keyword. Suppose for me it was mining, I put in the Google, and I put first I put annual reviews of in anthropology, and then when it opened the annual reviews page, I entered the mining, the keyword mining, and it gave two results. So these two annual review articles were basically review articles in the field. One was of around 1980s and one was around of 1990. And I was conducting my PhD in 2015, 2014-15. So by reading these two articles, I had the grasp of what has been done in the field of mining by the anthropologists till 1999. A recent, if you want to study mining now, and if you go and put mining in the key as a keyword in annual review website, now you will get 3 results. The third article has come recently, and you may find my fourth article, review article, in the context of mining studies in India, which has been published by Springer. So these 4 articles, if you go and read, you may find that what are these studies conducted in global context as well as in Indian context of the mining. So the annual reviews, and I think annual reviews is not available only in anthropology. You will find annual reviews in sociology, annual reviews in other discipline as well. For example, because my topic was not just mining, so I put the keyword as mining plus environment, and then it resulted into a very important review article, annual review article from Journal of Geoscience, that is Mining and Environment, written by some Glenn Banks. And that article also was very important for shaping and guiding my research. So starting from a review article can be, a very, very important key step when we start our literature review. I had prepared some of the the presentation based on what is literature review, what it is not, how to look into it, but I will not go into that, and I will jump to that what research students, basically the PhD students, think of literature review. A study was conducted by Bruce in 1994, where he interviewed around 500 doctoral students who were doing PhD, and he asked that what they think about literature review. So for them, there were different interpretation of what does it mean by literature review. Some of them said it is a list comprising pertinent items. For some of them, it was search. Processes of identifying relevant information and focus is on finding or looking, which may involve going through sources, for example, articles in database. For some, it was survey, like investigation of past and present writing or research on a subject. Then this investigation may be active or passive, etc. And then fourthly, for some it was vehicle for learning that leads to an increase in knowledge and understanding. Many have said that it is facilitator. It was understood by them as directly related to the research that is about to be or is being undertaken, the process helping the researcher to identify a topic, support a methodology, provide a context, or change research direction. And finally, for many of them, it was also a report, a written discussion of the literature, drawing on previously conducted investigation that is framing a written discourse about the literature, which may be established as a component or part of a thesis or other research report. So based on this study, Bruce suggested that we should not think about research as what researchers or early researchers were thinking about literature review. The list, search, and survey should be less preferred. What should be preferred is the vehicle, facilitator, and report. So I have quoted this from the very recent book on qualitative research by Ellen Bryman, published from Oxford University Press in 2018. So you can look at the recent edition and you will find this discussion, and I think it will be a kind of very clear, it will give you a clear insight that what literature review should be for a starting researcher. Secondly, I will also like to focus upon that this is the student's point of view. What the PhD examiners think about literature. So there was another study by the Holbrook et al. Who conducted an analysis of examiners' reports. Basically, we know that for every PhD there are 2 or 3 examiners, and they send a report. So that review every chapter, and those who are in academics, we all know it. So he analyzed these reports, and based on that, he said that there are 3 kind of comments by the PhD examiners, and he conducted around he surveyed around 1,300 PhD examiner reports. So based on that, he said that firstly the examiners prefer and they give more and more comments about the coverage of the literature, that what is the volume of your literature, what volume you have addressed. I was hearing before, and many of the questions were popping up, like what would be, the length and breadth of my literature. And I think they're very position by Professor Patnaik that it is up to your decision, that you should learn that where the enough is enough, and where it has, and Anita ma'am also said that where it has addressed your objective and where you will be able to fruitfully put your arguments of your thesis or dissertation or book or article you are writing. So that you have to decide, that you have to delimit that what will be, for example, if we look at the management discipline particularly, or some of the quantitative discipline in social sciences, what you will see that they do a kind of what we say, what we call as a systematic review, where they chart down very properly that okay, I have reviewed literature from 2010 to 2020 from these database. They are very particular about database, like they will mention that they have reviewed only Emerald, they have reviewed only EBSCO, they have LexisNexis or Google Scholar or JSTOR. They will very particularly mention that what database they have preferred. Or sometimes even they will go and say they have only reviewed 20 journals of the field. What are those? These are the, in ABCD ranking, they are the A rank journals, or kind of that. So that systematic review automatically gives you opportunity to limit your review. So most of the comments were about the coverage of the literature. So we should be very much aware that what we are covering and how much we are covering, because your examiners looks for that. Then identification of errors like punctuation marks, referencing, citation, all these things were very properly raised by the most of the examiners. Thirdly, he said that, and Holbrook said that examiners look for the comments about use and application of the literature. So how you have used it, whether you have put it in this, like Nita ma'am was saying that you should not put a very descriptive account. You should take an analytical framework and put your, maybe it may be to be very simple, maybe chronological. Though, for example, chronological literature review for my PhD, but it was not much appreciated by my supervisor. But still, I think I was able to put it into a frame of the mining anthropology of I call modernity, and mining anthropology of late modernity, and I have tried to contrast between these two and how it has changed in very big way. So that use and application of literature comment is very important, and I think there are sub comments within it where he has highlighted that. So again, I am not going to detail it, but 3-4 kind of comments which comes from the examiners, and I think you must when you are a doctoral researcher, you may go to this Hallbrook study of 2007 and look into what are the expectations of the PhD examiners in relation to the literature review. Now, what are the different? You can subdivide your literature into 3-4 kind. Like Ma'am was also saying, Professor Mathur was also saying that it can be thematic literature. But, Flick Flick has divided it into 4. Flick writes many books on research method from Sage, and he has mentioned 4 kind of literature review for qualitative research. One is theoretical literature, where you focus on literature. One is empirical literature, where you more focus upon the data, like you look into what others have found in form of data. Maybe if I'm going to study maybe the whole tribe, what someone has told about the Mundas, and the maybe the comparative or illustrative comparison which we do in anthropology. So, and then the methodological literature, because sometimes we forget to fine tune our methodology, and we give scant attention to methodological reviewing the methodology. But we have to keep in mind that methodology is evolving every day, and with a very rapid speed. And if we are not making update, or we are not making ourselves update with evolving methodology, then our papers or our writings will not be accepted at global forum or at global platform, and we will be confined to a very small audience or local audience, and will not get the global attention. Our research will not get the global attention. So we have to methodologically update ourselves. For example, there is a talk of ontological shift, and as I said, Professor Patnaik was mentioning about Anthropocene. And see, I learned about Anthropocene not from any anthropological text, but I was reading this book by one novel by Amitav Ghosh, that is The Great Derangement, and where I read about Anthropocene, and then I started looking at it, and then I used it for, in fact, my very first phase of my PhD thesis. I have mentioned
I'm sorry to interrupt.
So,
able to hear me? Dr. Pandey?
Also any textbook or book or any journal from Professor talked about it was considered, etc. So methodological improvement is also very important. Am I taking more time, Kalindi?
I request you to conclude because we are running.
So okay, Kalindi, I will sum up in 5 minutes.
Thank
you. I'm sorry.
We're just running short of time, and there are.
I understand because the session was supposed to end by 1. So may I take 5 minutes, or should I wind up now?
Maybe in 2 minutes. 2-3 minutes.
Okay, so perfect. So we know about different electronic database. We should start with the Social Science Citation Index, Scopus, WorldCat, and IPSCO, Process, Google Scholar. Some of these hosts keep on like their own website. For example, there is a journal, very important journal in anthropology, that is called Journal of Global and Historical Anthropology, which is not available through any database. And in fact, in Delhi University Library, you will not have this the digital access to this journal. So you have to find some other way. I wrote directly to the authors whose papers I wanted to read, and I got it. But some of you might not get lucky. So the focal, and so and then there is a call in anthropology itself for open access writing. For example, there was a blog, if you remember, Savage Minds. Now it is famous as Anthrodendum, and Anthrodendum provides plenty of articles, and it also advocates for the open access in anthropology. Similarly, there is a very important journal, HAU, How, our Journal of Ethnographic Theory, that also advocates for, and it's all its article and very, very important articles, updated articles published by How are now available as free access or open access articles. So the challenges are where to find my library, where to find, and I think if you are not finding library, you find the scholar. You go and meet the scholar who has done some previous work in your field. As I did, I went to Jharkhand and I meet a scholar called Professor Ashok Sen, who has done tremendous historical work, in relation to the Hood history. And he helped me in just his one small suggestion. He gave me 10 minutes time, and I think that 10 minutes were so valuable for my research that he guided me towards one small local library, which was far away place in a remote jungle type area, and tribal research and training center, and where I found everything related with the Hood tribe. So if you are not finding a good library, find a good scholar who may guide you where to get your literature. So, and then you have to fix your time frame, what frame you want to review and which time frame you want to review. You also think about whether you want to only cater to the English literature, or you also want to look at the local or vernacular or Hindi or other language writing, etc. You have to also limit your disciplinary choices. There were questions that how I should do interdisciplinary. So you may limit that I will do only anthropological or ethnographic work, I will review only, and then you have to limit your space also, that as I said, whether you want Asian studies or American studies or global studies, you can limit your literature review to that also. And at the end, I will suggest that I am not going, but I am just putting it for your knowledge, that there is an emerging field of meta-ethnography, which is based on the analysis of literature review, how to do kind of ethnographic work only or solely based upon the available literature. So you go, and it was coined by Noblit and Hare. You should look he published in 1988, way back. So you should look what is meta-ethnography and how to go about it at this pandemic time. So thanks for listening me, and thanks for the organizing such a wonderful audience. Over to Dr. Kalindi.
So thank you, Dr. Pandey. Thank you for highlighting crucial steps in research and also bringing in the role of information technology, especially in post-COVID times, when we are all dealing with a very visual culture. And thank you so much. I would briefly I would just probably break down all the questions into two categories. One category where everybody is asking for the resources that you shared. Maybe you could share the journals that you mentioned quickly. And the second is where scholars and participants are asking that what is the solution if there is paucity of resources and unequal access to technology, when literature review is such a crucial part of research, then how do we deal with that? And how do we deal with diversity in literature resources? So I would request you to quickly respond to these questions, because we are already running really late.
Do I say something
actually,
here?
I can, I for the first question.
Kalindi,
yes.
Just a suggestion that maybe you can put some of these sources in the chat box for
Yes.
People who may not have taken notes on. That will save time of the workshop also.
Yes. Yes. I suppose we could do that. We could just share the resources on the chat box, and you could just respond to this question on diversity of resources and unequal access to technology. This is one question that is there. Other than that, most of the questions focus on the resources. Thank you.
So for the first questions, what I will do, I will share my PPT to Dr. Avitoli ma'am, and she may share it with the participants. And for the second questions, I could not understand properly, but I think it was in relation to where to find the resource. What was it, Dr. Kalindi? The second question?
The question is about diversity of literature sources. What is the role of diverse literature sources in doing a good literature review? And
I think diverse, we have to look for the diverse literary sources. Definitely, there is no question that there is diversity. In fact, if we look any keyword into Google, it returns plenty of results, and we can't go for that. Authors are now suggesting to neighbor scholar, or you should prefer any, this Web of Sciences or social science citation index. So that has been suggested that better start your literature from social science citation index or some, identified maybe Emerald, maybe ProQuest, etc., rather than starting it from Google, because even if you put kinship in Google, it may result into around 4 million, 5 million results. So we have to address the diversity of literature. We have to limit it somehow.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey. I suppose the resources can be shared on the chat or through the PPT. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, participants, and thank you to Indian Anthropological Association for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalindi. Dr. Kalindi Sharma, she is an assistant professor in the Institute of Anthropology in Amity University, a very bright, young, upcoming faculty, very well articulated. Thank you so much, Dr. Kalindi, for moderating this session brilliantly. Thank you.